Dusty was a man weathered by the sun and wind, his hands calloused from years of working the land. He knew every inch of the sprawling ranch, every twist of the creek, and every rustle of the cottonwood trees. But his world expanded the day a small, blind boy named Samuel arrived. Samuel was an orphan, sent to the ranch by a kind-hearted woman who hoped the fresh air and open space would do him good. Dusty wasn't sure what to make of the boy at first. He was a practical man, not used to dealing with children, especially one who couldn't see. But Samuel's eagerness was infectious. He was like a sponge, soaking up every sound, every scent, every vibration in the air. He wanted to know everything about the ranch, about the horses, about the distant mountains he could only imagine. "Tell me about the horses, Dusty," Samuel would say, his face turned towards the sounds of the corral. "What color is Star? Does she like apples?" Dusty found himself describing the world in ways he never had before. He told Samuel about Star's white coat like fresh snow and the way she nuzzled his hand when he offered her an apple. He described the black stallion, Thunder, whose coat gleamed like polished obsidian and whose hooves thundered across the plains. He realized Samuel wasn't truly blind. He simply saw the world differently with his ears, his nose, and his fingertips. Dusty decided to become Samuel's eyes, to teach him to see the ranch in his own way. He started with the basics: the sweet smell of hay in the barn, the sharp tang of pine needles, the damp earth near the creek. He showed him how to feel the texture of different plants, the rough bark of an oak tree versus the smooth skin of a willow. Samuel learned quickly, his mind a vast, empty canvas eager to be filled with the colors and textures of the world around him. Their bond deepened, an unlikely friendship forged in the heart of the Wild West. Dusty's lessons started simply near the barn. "Close your eyes, Samuel," he'd say, even though Samuel's eyes were always closed. "Now tell me what you smell." Samuel would sniff the air, his small nose twitching. "Hay," he'd say, "and horses and something sweet." "That's the apple I gave Star," Dusty would chuckle. "Good job, Samuel. Now let's see if you can tell the difference between the different kinds of hay." He led Samuel to two different bales, one alfalfa and one timothy. "Smell this one first." Samuel inhaled deeply. "This one is sharp," he said, wrinkling his nose, "like it tickles my nose." "That's the alfalfa. It's got a stronger smell. Now try this one." The second bale smelled softer, sweeter. "This one is gentle," Samuel said, "like sunshine." "That's Timothy. The horses like it too." Dusty then moved on to the wildflowers that grew near the creek. He taught Samuel to distinguish between the delicate scent of the wild roses, the spicy fragrance of the sagebrush, and the honeyed aroma of the clover. Each flower had its own unique story to tell, and Samuel listened intently, absorbing every detail. One afternoon, a storm was brewing. Dusty pointed Samuel towards the wind. "Can you smell that, Samuel?" Samuel sniffed the air. "Yes," he said, his brow furrowed. "It smells wet and like something's going to break." "That's the rain coming," Dusty explained. "And the ozone, it smells different before a storm." As the wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain and the electricity in the air, Samuel smiled. He felt like he was finally starting to understand the language of the land, a language whispered on the wind and carried on the scent of the earth. He felt connected to the ranch, to Dusty, and to the vast, unseen world around him. He was learning to see without his eyes, and it was the most amazing thing he had ever experienced. Next, Dusty turned Samuel's attention to sound. "The ranch isn't just about what you smell, Samuel," he explained. "It's about what you hear too. Close your eyes again," Dusty chuckled, knowing Samuel always had his eyes closed. "What do you hear right now?" Samuel listened intently, tilting his head slightly. "The wind," he said, "and birds, different kinds of birds." "That's right. Can you tell me which ones?" Samuel focused. That one is a robin, he said, pointing in the general direction of the sound. And over there, that's a blue jay. They're loud. Dusty was impressed. You've got a good ear, Samuel. Now let's listen to the horses. They walked towards the corral where the horses were grazing. Dusty explained that each horse had a unique sound to its hooves. Listen carefully, he said. Star's hooves are light and quick. Thunder's are heavy and strong. He had Dusty walk each of the horses one at a time. Samuel closed his eyes, listening as each animal passed. He repeated the exercise daily, improving more each day. Dusty then introduced a new challenge, listening for gaits. Can you hear if a horse is walking, trotting, or galloping? He asked. It took Samuel a little longer to master this skill. He learned to distinguish the steady rhythm of a walk from the faster beat of a trot and the thunderous pounding of a gallop. Dusty even taught him to recognize the irregular gait of a horse with a limp, a subtle difference in sound that most people wouldn't even notice. One day, Dusty brought out an old set of bells. I'm going to walk away with these, Dusty said. Tell me which direction I go. Samuel tracked the sound with laser-like focus, accurately pointing Dusty to the north, the south, east, and west. Samuel found a whole new world opened up to him. He could tell when someone was approaching the ranch long before they arrived, just by the sound of their horses' hooves. He could identify different animals in the woods by their calls, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of a deer in the underbrush. The ranch was alive with sound, a symphony of nature that Samuel was learning to conduct. One sweltering afternoon, a lone rider approached the ranch. Dusty, who was mending a fence near the barn, watched him with a wary eye. Strangers didn't often come to this part of the country. Samuel, who was sitting nearby, whittling a piece of wood, suddenly stiffened. Dusty, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the buzzing of the insects. That man, he smells wrong. Dusty frowned. Wrong. What do you mean wrong? He hadn't noticed anything unusual himself. I don't know, Samuel said, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's like sour milk and something sharp like metal. Dusty glanced at the approaching rider, who was now dismounting near the house. He was a tall, lanky man with a thin mustache and shifty eyes. He wore a dusty brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. Maybe he's just been riding hard, Dusty said, trying to reassure Samuel and perhaps himself. Long ride in the sun can make a man smell a little ripe. But Samuel shook his head. No, he insisted, it's more than that, it's bad. The stranger approached them, a forced smile on his face. Howdy, he said, his voice raspy. Name's Jedediah. My horse threw a shoe a few miles back, wondering if you might have a spare and a place to rest for the night. We might, Dusty said cautiously, his hand instinctively moving towards the rifle leaning against the fence post. But we don't get many visitors out here. What brings you this way, Jedediah? Just passing through, Jedediah said, his eyes darting around the ranch. Heard there was good grazing in these parts. As Jedediah spoke, Samuel edged closer to Dusty, his hand gripping Dusty's pant leg tightly. The sour milk smell seemed to intensify, and Samuel could almost taste the metallic tang in the air. Something about this man was deeply unsettling, a feeling that resonated in the pit of Samuel's stomach. Dusty dismissed it as Samuel being a child, but the words would stick with him. Jedediah stayed the night, and Dusty, despite his unease, offered him a spare room in the bunkhouse. He kept a close watch on the stranger, noticing how Jedediah avoided eye contact and seemed overly interested in the layout of the ranch. The next morning, Jedediah thanked Dusty for his hospitality and rode off, disappearing over the horizon. A few days later, a chilling wave of fear washed over the nearby settlements. Children were disappearing. One from the Miller farm, another from the Johnson place. Panic spread like wildfire. Parents kept their children close, doors were bolted shut, and the cheerful sounds of children playing were replaced by an eerie silence. Dusty sat on the porch, listening to the frantic news on the radio. He felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He remembered Samuel's words about Jedediah, the unsettling scent he couldn't quite place. He dismissed it as a child's imagination, but now he wasn't so sure. He looked over at Samuel, who was sitting quietly on the steps, listening to the radio with a grave expression. "Samuel," Dusty said, his voice low. "Remember that man, Jedediah, who came by the other day?" Samuel nodded, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "The one who smelled bad." "Yes," Dusty said. "Did you hear anything else about him?" "Anything at all?" Samuel closed his eyes, concentrating. "His horse," he said after a moment. "It had a loose shoe on the left front hoof. It made a different sound, a little click with each step." Dusty's heart leaped. A loose shoe. That was something the sheriff hadn't mentioned. It was a detail only someone with Samuel's acute hearing would have noticed. A glimmer of hope sparked within him. Maybe, just maybe, they could help find the missing children. He knew that the sheriff and his men were looking in the wrong places. They needed a new light, something that would set them apart from everyone else. It was all starting to come together. The next morning, Dusty and Samuel set out. Dusty packed a rifle, some supplies, and a canteen of water. He helped Samuel onto Star, the gentle mare, and they rode towards the edge of the ranch. "Are you sure about this, Samuel?" Dusty asked, his voice filled with concern. "Oh, this could be dangerous." "I'm sure, Dusty," Samuel replied, his voice firm. "I can hear him, he's not far." They rode in silence for a while, Samuel listening intently. The wind carried the scent of pine and sagebrush, but beneath it, Samuel detected a faint, metallic tang. "That way," he said, pointing towards the west. "The smell is stronger there." They followed Samuel's lead, riding through the dense underbrush. The terrain grew rougher, the path winding and narrow. Dusty relied on Samuel's keen hearing to guide them, listening for the telltale click of the loose horseshoe. Suddenly, Samuel tensed. "Stop," he whispered, grabbing Dusty's arm. "I hear him, he's close, and I hear children, they're crying." Dusty dismounted, pulling Samuel down with him. He crept forward cautiously, peering through the trees. In a small clearing, he saw Jedediah. He was leading a string of horses, each carrying a child. The children were bound and gagged, their faces pale with fear. Dusty's blood ran cold. He had to act quickly. He couldn't risk a direct confrontation. He needed a plan, something that would give him the element of surprise. He turned to Samuel, whispering, "Can you tell where they're heading?" Samuel closed his eyes, focusing on the sounds. "They're going towards the old Blackwood cave," he said. "It's a long way, but they're moving fast." Dusty knew the Blackwood cave. It was a dark, treacherous place, filled with hidden passages and dead ends. It would be the perfect place to hide someone. He knew this was it. They were on the right trail. He gripped his rifle, his determination hardening. It was time to stop Jedediah, no matter the cost. The sound of children crying fueled his resolve. He had to save them. "We need to be smart about this, Samuel," Dusty whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. "We can't just charge in there." "He's got the children." "I know a way," Samuel said, his voice surprisingly calm. "There's a shortcut through the woods. It's narrow and rough, but it will get us ahead of them." Dusty hesitated. He wasn't familiar with this particular part of the woods. "Are you sure, Samuel? It could be dangerous." "I'm sure," Samuel insisted. "I remember the feel of the ground, the way the trees smell. I can guide you." Dusty trusted Samuel. He had learned to rely on the boy's extraordinary senses. "All right," he said, "lead the way." Samuel took Dusty's hand and led him into the dense forest. The trees were thick and gnarled, their branches intertwining to form a dark canopy overhead. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. Samuel moved with surprising confidence, his bare feet finding the narrow path with ease. He whispered directions to Dusty, describing the terrain in vivid detail. Careful, he'd say, there's a fallen log ahead, step to the left. Or, the path narrows here, keep close to the trees. Dusty marveled at Samuel's ability. He could see the path with his other senses. He felt the subtle changes in the air, the texture of the ground beneath his feet, the echo of his voice bouncing off the trees. He was truly reading the land. As they moved deeper into the woods, the sound of the horses grew fainter. Samuel knew they were gaining ground. The scent of Jedediah, that unsettling mix of sour milk and metal, lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the danger that lay ahead. They were getting closer. Soon they would reach the Blackwood Cave, and then the real challenge would begin. They emerged from the woods near the entrance to the Blackwood Cave. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something ancient and foreboding. The sound of dripping water echoed from within the cave's dark mouth. "They're inside," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can hear them. The children are scared." Dusty nodded grimly. He could hear the faint sounds of whimpering and shuffling coming from the cave. He knew they had to act quickly. The longer they waited, the more danger the children were in. "I'm going in," Dusty said, checking his rifle. "You stay here, Samuel." "It's too dangerous." "No," Samuel said, his voice firm. "I can help. I know the cave. I can hear the echoes. I can tell you which way to go." Dusty hesitated. He didn't want to put Samuel in harm's way, but he knew the boy was right. Samuel's knowledge of sound could be invaluable in the dark, twisting passages of the cave. "All right," Dusty said, making a quick decision. "But you stay close to me, and you do exactly what I say." They approached the cave entrance cautiously, their senses on high alert. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper. As they stepped inside, the sound of dripping water intensified, echoing eerily through the cavern. Samuel reached out, his hand finding Dusty's. He squeezed it tightly, offering silent reassurance. "This way," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the dripping water. "There's a narrow passage to the left, be careful. The ground is uneven." Dusty followed Samuel's directions, his rifle held at the ready. The darkness was almost absolute, but Samuel seemed to navigate the cave with ease, his knowledge of sound guiding them through the labyrinthine passages. The adventure was just beginning. The cave was a maze of twisting tunnels and echoing chambers. The air grew thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something acrid and stale, like unwashed bodies. The children's whimpers grew louder, guiding them deeper into the darkness. "This way," Samuel whispered, his hand gripping Dusty's tightly. "The passage narrows ahead, and there's a drop-off, be careful." Dusty trusted Samuel implicitly. He knew that the boy's ears were his eyes in this dark, unforgiving place. He followed Samuel's directions, his rifle held at the ready, his senses on high alert. They moved slowly, cautiously, their footsteps echoing eerily through the cavern. The sound of dripping water was constant, a relentless percussion that added to the tension. Dusty could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him, the sense of being watched, of being trapped. Suddenly, Samuel stopped. "Wait," he whispered. "I hear something ahead, voices." Dusty strained his ears. He could hear them too now, muffled voices speaking in low tones. They were getting closer. "Stay behind me," Dusty whispered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Get ready." They crept forward, their hearts pounding in their chests. The voices grew louder, clearer. They rounded a bend in the tunnel and saw them. Jedediah and another man were standing in a large cavern, talking. The kidnapped children were huddled together in a corner, their faces pale with fear. Jedediah was holding a lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the cavern walls. Dusty took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew this was it, the moment of truth. He had to rescue those children, no matter the cost. He looked at Samuel, his young face etched with determination. He knew that together they could do this. He just needed to find the right moment to strike. "I've got a plan," Dusty whispered, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the other men's voices. I'm going to create a diversion. You need to get those children out of here. Can you do that? There's another way out, Samuel whispered back, his voice filled with confidence. A small passage. It leads to the back of the cave. It's narrow, but the children can fit through it. Can you lead them? Dusty asked. Yes, Samuel said. I know the way. I can hear the echoes. I can smell the air. Dusty nodded. He trusted Samuel implicitly. He knew that the boy was their only hope. All right, he said. Here's what we're going to do. Dusty outlined his plan in a few hushed words. He would create a distraction, drawing Jedediah and his accomplice away from the children. Samuel would then lead the children through the hidden passage, out of the cave and to safety. Dusty took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He stepped out into the cavern, his rifle raised. Hold it right there, Jedediah, he shouted, his voice echoing through the cavern. Jedediah and his accomplice whirled around, their faces contorted with surprise. Jedediah reached for his gun, but Dusty was faster. He fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the cavern like a thunderclap. Don't move, Dusty shouted, his voice ringing with authority. I've got you covered. As Jedediah and his accomplice were distracted, Samuel sprang into action. He moved quickly, quietly towards the huddled children. Come on, he whispered, his voice filled with urgency. I know a way out. The children, their eyes wide with fear, followed Samuel without hesitation. He led them through the darkness, his hand outstretched, guiding them towards the hidden passage. He could hear the echoes of their footsteps, the faint scent of their fear. He knew that he had to get them out of here before it was too late. The fate of these children rested on his shoulders. He was ready. The cavern erupted in chaos. Dusty exchanged fire with Jedediah and his accomplice, the sound of gunshots echoing through the cave like thunder. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder and the acrid scent of fear. Meanwhile, Samuel led the children through the narrow passage, his hand outstretched, guiding them through the darkness. The passage was tight and claustrophobic, the walls pressing in on them from all sides. The children stumbled and cried, but Samuel urged them onward, his voice a beacon of hope in the darkness. Almost there, he whispered, his voice filled with encouragement. Just a little further. He could smell the fresh air, the scent of pine and earth that signaled the exit. He knew they were close. As they neared the end of the passage, Samuel heard a faint sound behind them. The sound of footsteps growing closer. Jedediah, he must have realized what was happening and was coming after them. Samuel pushed the children forward, urging them to hurry. He knew that if Jedediah caught them, all would be lost. They burst out of the passage into the cool, fresh air. They were on a hillside overlooking a valley. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. It was a world away from the darkness and fear of the cave, but their ordeal wasn't over yet. Jedediah emerged from the passage, his face contorted with rage. He raised his gun, aiming at the children. No, Samuel shouted, throwing himself in front of the children, shielding them from the blast. He knew he had to protect them, no matter the cost. He was ready to face whatever came next. He would not let Jedediah hurt these children. He could hear the echoes of Jedediah's rage. He knew he had to do something. He had a plan. Before Jedediah could fire, Samuel acted. He knew the terrain. He knew there were loose rocks scattered along the hillside. He quickly located a softball-sized rock, hefted it in his hand, and aimed based purely on the sound of Jedediah's breathing. He threw the rock with all his might. It struck Jedediah's gun, knocking it from his hand. The gun clattered harmlessly to the ground. Jedediah roared with fury. He lunged at Samuel, his eyes blazing with hatred, but Dusty was already there. He burst out of the cave, his rifle raised. "Get away from him," he shouted, his voice echoing across the valley. Jedediah hesitated, turning to face Dusty. He knew he was outmatched. He glanced at the children, then back at Dusty, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled before turning and fleeing into the woods. Dusty didn't pursue him. He knew that the most important thing was to protect the children. He turned to Samuel, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right, Samuel?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. Samuel nodded, his face pale but determined. "I'm fine, Dusty," he said, "but we need to get the children to safety." Dusty gathered the children together, leading them down the hillside towards the nearby town. He knew that they were safe now. Jedediah was gone and the children were finally free. He could smell the relief of the children. As they walked, Dusty placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder, his heart filled with pride. He had never met anyone as brave and resourceful as this young, blind boy. He had taught Samuel to read the land, but Samuel had taught him something even more important. The power of courage, the importance of trust, and the true meaning of friendship. They still had the accomplice to worry about, but he knew they'd be able to catch him. He was sure of it. The townspeople were overjoyed to see the children return. Families were reunited, tears of joy were shed, and Samuel was hailed as a hero. The sheriff and his deputies quickly apprehended Jedediah's accomplice, bringing an end to the reign of terror that had gripped the community. A few days later, Dusty and Samuel were back at the ranch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the plains. They sat on the porch, watching the horses graze in the pasture. "You were very brave, Samuel," Dusty said, breaking the silence. "You saved those children." Samuel shrugged, his face flushed with pride. "We saved them, Dusty," he said. "We did it together." Dusty smiled. He knew that Samuel was right. They had done it together. They had faced danger, overcome obstacles, and emerged victorious. Their bond had been tested, and it had proven stronger than ever. "You know," Dusty said after a moment, "I've been thinking. You've got a real gift, Samuel. You can see things that other people can't. You can hear things that other people can't. You should use that gift to help others." Samuel looked at Dusty, his eyes shining with excitement. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean," Dusty said, "that you could be a tracker. You could help people find lost animals or even lost people. You could use your senses to make a difference in the world." Samuel smiled. He liked the sound of that. He had always wanted to help others, to make a difference. And now he had a way to do it. He could use his unique abilities to make the world a better place. He had so much to offer. From that day forward, Samuel began to hone his skills, practicing his tracking abilities, learning to identify even the faintest scents and sounds. He knew that he had a long way to go, but he was determined to succeed. He had a purpose now, a reason to keep learning, to keep growing. He had a future. He could smell it in the air. Weeks turned into months, and Samuel continued to learn and grow. Dusty taught him everything he knew about the land, about tracking, about survival. He taught him how to read the signs of the forest, the subtle clues that revealed the presence of animals, the direction of the wind, the changing of the seasons. Samuel, in turn, taught Dusty to listen more closely, to pay attention to the subtle details that he had always overlooked. He taught him to appreciate the beauty of the world, not just with his eyes, but with all of his senses. One day, a frantic farmer arrived at the ranch. His prize-winning bull had gone missing, and he was desperate to find him. He had heard about Samuel's tracking abilities, and he begged for his help. Dusty looked at Samuel, his eyes filled with pride. "What do you think, Samuel?" he asked. "Are you ready for your first case?" Samuel smiled. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the wind, the earth, the distant fields. "I'm ready," he said, and so Samuel set off with Dusty by his side to track the missing bull. He followed the faint scent of the animal, listening for the sound of its hooves, feeling for the tracks in the earth. He used all of his senses, all of the skills that Dusty had taught him, to guide him on his quest. It took them several days, but finally they found the bull grazing peacefully in a remote valley. The farmer was overjoyed, showering Samuel with gratitude. As they rode back to the ranch, Dusty smiled. He knew that Samuel had found his calling. He was a tracker, a protector, a hero. He was a boy who had overcome adversity, who had used his unique gifts to make a difference in the world. He could smell the pride Dusty had, and Dusty was so proud. Samuel was the son he never had, and their story was just beginning. The years passed, and Samuel's reputation as a tracker grew. People came from far and wide, seeking his help in finding lost loved ones, missing animals, or even hidden treasures. He became known as the Seer, a man who could see the world in ways that no one else could. Dusty remained by his side, his constant companion, his mentor, and his friend. He watched with pride as Samuel blossomed, using his unique gifts to make the world a better place. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the plains, Samuel turned to Dusty, his face filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Dusty," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You gave me a life, you taught me to see the world. You showed me that even though I can't see with my eyes, I can still see with my heart." Oh, that Dusty smiled, placing his hand on Samuel's shoulder. "You taught me just as much, Samuel," he said. "You taught me to listen more closely, to appreciate the beauty of the world, and to believe in the power of the human spirit." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky. The air was filled with the scent of sagebrush and pine, the sound of crickets chirping in the fields. It was a peaceful, tranquil scene, a testament to the bond that had grown between these two unlikely friends. Samuel closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of the night air. He could hear the distant howl of a coyote, the rustling of leaves in the trees. He could feel the warmth of Dusty's hand on his shoulder, the love and friendship that bound them together. He knew that he was truly blessed. He had found a home, a family, and a purpose in life. He had learned to see the world in his own unique way, and he had used his gifts to make a difference. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that their story was far from over. The world was wide, and there was still so much to see, so much to learn, and so much to do. He was ready for whatever the future held, as long as he had Dusty by his side. Their journey together had just begun.